Hi and welcome to the Journalism Salute. I'm Mark Simon. In each episode, we'll talk to or about an interesting person or organization related to journalism. The intent is to show that journalists are not the enemy of the people. Thank you for listening. On this episode, we're joined by Donna Ladd and Ashton Pittman of the Mississippi Free Press. The Mississippi Free Press is a nonprofit media outlet for the state devoted to going beyond partisanship and publishing solutions journalism for the Magnolia State and all of its people. Donna has been a columnist, feature writer, investigative reporter, and editor. Among the highlights of her work is investigative reporting that led to a Klansman being convicted of a more than 40-year-old murder. She first co-founded the Jackson Free Press to cover that part of the state, and then the Mississippi Free Press to go bigger. Ashton's work shows up in my Twitter feed a lot, and for good reason. He covers the big stories in the state, some of which we'll discuss here. And he breaks a lot of news, often connected to the governor's office or racial injustice. Full disclosure, for a very brief period of time in the early 90s, I interned for Donna. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Donna, first of all, walk us through the path that led to the origin of this organization.
Well, as you know, we started the Jackson Free Press 19 years ago, and it serves the capital city of Mississippi. And it was kind of the original model of it was an alt-weekly print, kind of the standard, although it was always very inclusive and kind of digging into history, which was kind of a difference between it and some of the other alt-weeklies even back then. But from the beginning, I really wanted to do a statewide publication, to do the kinds of work that we're doing all over my home state. But that's hard, with the business model of doing a statewide publication is very difficult because you sell ads where you are, and it's hard to cover the whole state, that kind of thing. Now, we were named for a publication, a civil rights movement publication called the Mississippi Free Press from the 1960s that was done by a multiracial group of folks. And that's what the JFP was named after. So I always wanted to bring back, quote unquote, the Mississippi Free Press. And we've owned the URL for years, but just kind of waiting for the reason or the logic to do it, right? And it really, the logic to do it kind of came out of necessity in the sense of what's going on in the journalism world with advertising, the business model problems. And then I started paying attention to nonprofit media. I had some real problems with the idea of doing nonprofit media in the beginning, just because I didn't want to have to constantly fundraise, but that's life these days, right? And so it was really in recent years that I and then Kimberly Griffin, who is also from Mississippi, and she's a Black woman from Mississippi, I'm a white woman from Mississippi. We decided to get together. She was already working with the Jackson Free Press as the associate publisher. She'd been there for 12 years. So we decided to get together and start the Mississippi Free Press. We planned to start it in 2020, which we did, but we didn't know that a pandemic was hitting. And so what happened, to bring it full circle, is that we went home to quarantine, depending on which one of us, but around March 12th last year, just as the pandemic was coming to Mississippi. And then Ashton and I, who had been working together, we're kind of a good editor-writer team. We were home and we said, we need to be reporting on this pandemic as it's unfolding and not just in Jackson. We need to be comparing what's going on around the state, watching the safety precautions. And so we just said, and it's very Ashton and me, but we just said, let's publish. Our website wasn't ready. So my partner, Todd, threw up some sort of starter site, that was our first one. And Ashton and I just started doing stuff. And that's how it was born. We're about to turn 1, and it's been an incredible year.
And it looks amazing. Ashton, explain how you got to this point in your career. Just give us a little bit of background on your writing career and the appeal of doing specifically the work that you do in covering the state.
Well, I graduated from the University of Southern Miss back in 2014 with a journalism degree. I didn't take any jobs at any local newspapers at the time. And one of the reasons I didn't was because I was worried that I wouldn't be able to do the kind of work that I believed in and that I really thought this state needed. Because there's just a lot of topics that traditional news has shied away from in the state traditionally, especially when it comes to systemic racism. So actually for a while I blogged and I would do freelance work, and I ended up writing for a magazine for a little while. It just so happened that back in 2018, someone told me that the Jackson Free Press needed someone to freelance for them for one night. And I've been writing with Donna as my editor ever since. I started working at the Jackson Free Press, and then in early 2020, I left. And then in March 2020, we started MFP.
So this is a story, the emails at the University of Mississippi, this is a story that has a lot of threads to it, nearly 20 stories on this subject. Tell us about the work that your organization has done on it.
Well, when it started, we didn't expect the pandemic, and we didn't expect this story to fall in our lap within 3 months, really a month, because we first started hearing about April, right, Ashton? And so basically I got some emails that from some, what we now call whistleblowers at the University of Mississippi, saying that there were these just viciously awful, sexist, racist, homophobic emails that were going back and forth between the dean of journalism and a wealthy donor. And we were actually already working on something to do with the University of Mississippi that, to tease you, we haven't published yet. We've been working on it for so long. It's kind of a different, tangentially related piece. But this dropped, and here's the thing. What I was reading that they sent struck me as so incredibly urgent to get out, that there were these donors and grown men, very grown men, walking around the court square there taking pictures of young women particularly, and calling them African hookers and just these horrible things. And so I got the emails, and I reached out to Ashton and wanted him to take a look at it. And we were and really that's kind of where it grew. We were paying attention because we thought other media would pick it up, but within the state that still hasn't happened to this day. But I'll kick it to Ashton and let him talk about what he discovered once he got in there.
Right. And that really gets to my point about, why I didn't take a job at other media outlets when I graduated from Southern Miss, is because this is the kind of story that needs to be told. And I am just shocked that we started publishing these stories in August. We've gotten some national attention for them, but not a single other paper in Mississippi or any other publication that I know of has gone into this aspect of this story, has reported on these emails that she's talking about, these deeply racist emails. And it wasn't just about one donor and one dean. It showed a pattern with donors and with officials at the school of really kind of catering to the wishes of donors who expressed really racist views and oftentimes sexist views, and their desire to kind of keep the lost cause element of the school thriving on campus. Because there's been a lot of anger over the removal of the Confederate monuments, over the change of the mascot, over all these things over the years on campus. So we thought this would get a lot of attention. And we know that other outlets had these emails, received these emails, but so far it's just been us. One of the things that was a really big issue in reporting these stories is that a lot of people at the school, in the faculty, on the staff, just even students, we had a lot of concerns over fears that people there had about witch hunts and about whistleblowers being targeted and about retaliation. So it was very hard to find people who would talk to us on the record. And we had to do a lot of work to really verify all of this information and to assure people that we would protect their identities. And the reason there are now 18 stories, part of the reason, is that after our stories published, there was a whistleblower hunt that the university has gone on using its Title IX office to go after the whistleblowers, even accusing the whistleblowers themselves of targeting faculty of color. And they've also even involved the university police. Basically, the whistleblowers have been accused of harassing people because they've sent these emails, copies of these emails, to different people in the school and sent copies of our articles and tried to raise these issues. And so it's just been an ongoing saga. I will say it hasn't done much to dissuade us from the fact that the sources we had might have been onto something when they said they feared witch hunts and they didn't feel they could safely use their names for our stories.
You know why?
So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It's very obvious. Yeah.
So, all right. So I want to segue from that to this. Explain the challenge of covering the governor and dealing with the state legislature in the state.
Well, I think the challenge is, we have a Republican supermajority at this point. That wasn't always true from the beginning of the Jackson Free Press, but it certainly is for the Mississippi Free Press. And for a number of years now, the access for journalists to state officials, particularly on the Republican side, but not only, I want to make that clear, has eroded. And we would argue that a lot of that is because journalists here give in too easily to certain things, right? Like they go along with, well, we won't do interviews, just send us statements all the time, or send us your questions, which we don't, we have a policy of not providing questions in advance. And so it becomes difficult, and especially ever since Governor Haley Barbour was governor and really kind of shut down access unless you were, clearly in their court. They're just not going to talk to you very much. Now, we are not access journalists, and we prove that on a regular basis. And obviously what I mean by that is that we're not going to pull a story if you don't just or allow you to make us pull a story because you're not going to talk to us, right? We're going to go get the story anyway, which is, it goes, we could also call ourselves beyond stenography. We're going to go find the story. We're going to try to talk to you, but we're going to put the story out. And then if you want to talk to us, then you can. But I think one of and they get away with too much in Mississippi through our existing kind of journalism infrastructure. And so part of our goal is to lead on changing the infrastructure statewide and encourage other journalists to give up some access because you're doing good reporting. So this week with the Jackson Water situation, Nick Juden, who came over from the Jackson Free Press to work for the Mississippi Free Press, he broke is a weird word to say, but he did this story because we have this deep institutional knowledge about something that Delbert Hosemann, our lieutenant governor, said about the Black leadership of Jackson. He basically, and of course Delbert Hosemann is white and is Republican, and he made this comment that we hadn't tried to do anything on our water since Cain Ditto. That's the last white mayor of Jackson from the 90s. And so it's this, again, I can't speak to his intent, but it's this coded racist kind of thing that we hear all the time from the state legislature and the leaders of the state, because they just operate openly with this kind of race politics without getting called out on it. Nick knew what he was hearing. I certainly knew what I was hearing. So he put out a story that's now leading and getting it's a different conversation now than it was before he put out that story. And some other media kind of scrambling to catch up, which is great. We need more media on it. But so my point is, Hosemann likes Nick just fine. He's done interviews with him, which is kind of unusual for us, these days, to get good interviews with top Republican leaders. He may stop doing interviews for a while. I hope not, because I think there's more to say. But we're not going to not do that story right there and call that out because we knew what was being said. in order to keep that access. And that's I think Ashton could attest to this. That's the difference between us and traditional Mississippi media, whether they're older outlets or newer, is that we just, we'll give up access to tell the truth.
Right. That's very true. One of the things that I think that has happened with our current governor, Governor Reeves, that I don't recall happening with Governor Bryant, is that he does hold press conferences where you can ask questions as a member of the press. But there's still a lot that could be improved. But that's something that especially Nick Juden is very good at, is talking to politicians when they actually hold press conferences, asking them important questions and then following up. I think we have a lot of cases where I think journalists will ask a politician a question and then get an answer that's either really a strange answer, or that, like Donna was talking about, includes some kind of coded message, or is just a non-answer. And journalists will go and there's not all journalists in Mississippi do this. I'm not just saying that, you have to work for the Mississippi Free Press to not do this, but a lot of journalists will just get that answer and put it in their story and not follow up and say, but wait, this doesn't make a lot of sense, or what are you implying with this? So I think you don't just need the access to be able to ask someone questions. And I think someone noted that a Vox journalist discovered that you never ask yes or no questions to Tate Reeves this past week. It's not just about having that access. It's about knowing how to use it to maximal effect, to actually get real answers.
Apparently the Vox reporter talked for a paragraph and then Tate Reeves said yes or no, whichever, and turned it off. I teach constantly never to ask a yes or no question, so I was kind of preening over that. It's like, oh, yep, I told y'all.
How do you decide what stories to cover?
Oh, well, we're still fairly small, and, I think a lot of it's instinct, but it's also, we haven't talked this out. I mean, Ashton and I are really, I think, mentally in sync on these things, but psychically maybe. The stories that we want to tell are stories, that other people won't. I mean, that's I would call that high on the list. So the email story, nobody else was doing it, so we did it. But also stories that require historic context to tell them right. And so the email story didn't just talk about, as didn't just talk about these emails. It gave all this contextual history, not just the 1960s, but when the donor was actually at college, which is several decades later, and some of the things going on. We're fearless in this state when it comes to telling the truth, because, Ashton and I and Kimberly and our whole startup team is actually from Mississippi. And we're all sick of this idea that they lie to us about our own history, especially race history. And so we believe strongly that the only way to tell, to tell stories in a way that make sense and lead to solutions is that if you dig out the causes, no matter how difficult they are. And so if there's context that's needed, we love that story, especially if it's a story we look at, and Ashton and I particularly would say, nobody else is going to tell this story right, because they're afraid of the context. There was an example, a couple years ago, whatever it was, of another outlet that I won't name, but did a story about Governor Phil Bryant, winning an award from the Sons of Confederate Veterans, which is, that's bad enough. But the award's named for our secessionist governor, slaveholder, just this terrible, terrible person. And somehow there's a whole story about him getting the award that never mentioned slavery. And so that's the kind of thing that we're just not going to do a story that way. We're going to embed all of those things.
Well, I would say we, aside from, contextual history, I think we really like stories that get into public concern, that deal with public records and documents, and that allow us to really get into the details of of things that are happening in a way that provides more transparency for people in this state. Such as last year in May, the governor had this Restart Mississippi Commission in May to basically restart the state coming out of the coronavirus, supposedly, crisis last May. As you see, we're still not out of that, but we were curious about who was on this Restart Mississippi Commission that was basically advising him on how to reopen the state, reopen all the businesses, and just get everything moving again, long before we had mask mandate. And so we looked into it, and one of the things, one big issue that we have is that in Mississippi, if you want to look and see campaign finance filings, you basically have to go to the Secretary of State's website. You can't just search like a database. You have to get scanned, print. Okay, so basically they print out hundreds of pages of their filings, and then somebody scans each page and puts it into a PDF where half the pages are sideways. And you have to go through those scanned, terrible scans of those PDFs to find whatever you're looking for.
And yes, it's on purpose.
So,
I'll just say that on the record.
So like, if I want to know how much some rich person gave to Tate Reeves, I can't just go search for that person's name. I can, because they actually do have a database tool, but nobody actually has to input that information to that database. So you're not really going to get a complete picture, if anything. So what I ended up doing was I ended up getting every single filing Tate Reeves had for the past however many years he's been in office. Well, since 2008, I think. He's been in office longer than that. But for the relevance of what we were doing, it went back to 2008. And I got every single one of those PDFs, and this took a few days. And I ran them through a program that basically made all those PDFs searchable. I think I ended up with several thousand pages. And so I just went through and I searched for each of the members of the Restart Mississippi Commission to find out, what had they given to Tate Reeves and the businesses they worked for, or the PACs they worked for. And I think we came up with something like more than $800,000. And there were only one or two members that he had appointed, and I think it was like 16, 17 people who weren't significant donors, or whose businesses or PACs or whatever it was weren't significant donors. So that was a story that none of the Restart Mississippi Commission stories that anybody else had done, because, I mean, it takes a lot of time, and those tools aren't readily available. We did end up having someone from the Clarion Ledger reach out to us, though, and we did share the PDF we had because they wanted to use that for a different story to search through Tate Reeves' filings. So that's just one example. I think the fact that we're willing to go the extra mile to try to get information out there that makes the state and our leadership more transparent, if they won't do it themselves.
Let me add one quick one that I think is urgent to say. Systemic connections. That's our other thing. That's our obsession. I mean, you could see, if you were here in my house, you'd see I have whiteboards everywhere about the way, murder boards, I call them, but how things are connected. Because we really do know that we don't solve anything from poverty to crime to corruption or anything else without constantly, it's a chess game almost. I mean, you're thinking about how everything is connected, and so that your reporting is reflecting that. And to me, that's missing way too often in a lot of kind of traditional journalism, although I think a lot of people are scrambling to figure it out now, which is good. But yeah, so systemic connections are very, very important.
Okay, we've reached the portion of our show in which our intern, Emmy Liederman, takes over and handles the advice segment. We like to make sure that we give plenty of advice. We get plenty of advice from our guests. So Emmy, take it away.
Hello. So I'm wondering from either of you, what gaps in reporting and in journalism should young students and people entering the workforce look to fill?
Well, I can go first real quick. I think it builds on what I was just saying. Think deeply about how things are connected. Always ask. And so it can be, it's a gap in the sense, the way I'm answering it, it's a gap within all of our subjects so often, to think about why does that problem exist? Who did what when? what legacies did that create? And then I'm a big fan of solutions journalism, but you can't really get to the solutions unless you know the causes, right? And so that's what I want to see. It's like, and obviously that applies to race and racism, misogyny, all sorts of things. But to learn to do that, like the people that I meet who I want to work with are people who think very systemically. And we've been doing this on, my other publication for 20 years almost. And I'm really happy to see the journalism start to come to a place where we've already been here in the middle of Mississippi. People are noticing now more nationally, kind of the way we do things, which is great, but they're noticing it in part because they're kind of looking to do some of these things, right? So that's what I would say. I would also say a specific subject area that I have really, higher ed, for a subject area, a lot hides in higher ed. We're really learning that. I'm also working on a separate piece that's not in Mississippi that involves higher ed, where I've learned a lot of things. And so I think that that's an area where a lot of things hide.
I mean, I totally agree with what you said. And on systemic connection, asking who benefits. Because I think a lot of the practice in the past has been to kind of take PR statements and then rewrite them into, well, essentially more PR, but that doesn't cast a critical eye towards, this might sound good, who's benefiting from it, whose expense is this coming at, and what are the questions I should be asking, what's the information they're not giving us on this, what are my questions I have about this. And I think that there were so many times over the years that I would read a news story and I would have questions and I'd be like, I wonder about that. And then there would never be an answer. And I was just used to that. I think one of the things that I love about working with Donna is that she has always encouraged me to, she would always put little notes in my stories. Yeah, but what about this? And I'd be like, yeah, well, I thought that too, but that information wasn't available and no one else ever asked that. Right. So now, I end up with really long stories, but it's because if I have a question, I think it should be answered. Another thing I would say to answer your question is that I think upcoming journalists really need to not go into this, especially if they're interested in reporting on politics, not go into this wanting to be a, quote, politics reporter.
Yeah.
Wanting to report on the horse race of campaigns, the red versus blue, all of that. But instead, they should see themselves as their job primarily as protectors of democracy, reporting on democracy, focusing on not the politicians, but on the voters, and also on voting, on, voter disenfranchisement issues, on making sure that people's voices can be heard. Instead of focusing on a select few people who, probably have various reasons, some good, some bad, for being there, and who want this to be basically a team sport. Because it's not a sport, it's people's lives. Mm-hmm. And so that's a really big one that I think, and I hope upcoming journalists reorient their views away from that kind of red versus blue reporting on politics and more towards democracy.
When writing about such sensitive topics, such as social justice and race, how do you kind of account for your own bias and what you may be trying to prove in a story and make sure that all sides are fairly and adequately represented?
I believe that when you're talking about something like systemic injustice, the first thing you do is you prioritize the views of those who are experiencing this. Mm-hmm. Someone who is a victim of racism, their viewpoint matters a lot more than, and is far more relevant to a story than someone who is not a victim of that injustice. They're the experts on what it's like to experience that injustice. So, I don't believe you do a kind of both sides thing where you take people who are victims of injustice and people who don't really believe it exists, and you kind of say, well, we're going to balance it out by having these two, quote, sides represented. Obviously, with any story, you want to make sure that that you're listening to multiple voices, because there are going to be people even within one group or community, because people are individuals who have had different experiences and different views. It's important to listen to the people who are affected, and it's important to get expert voices, people who have been dealing with these issues, and who are intimately familiar with them. Getting their input. You look for people who are actually trying to find solutions, and you talk to those people. And I think that's how you deal with issues of injustice, because that is where you find the balance. It's talking to the people who understand it and who are experts and who are trying to solve things. There wouldn't be any balance if I went to someone who didn't have any experience with those things and who wasn't interested in finding solutions or changing things, and just filled half the story with them and half the story with other people. So I think you always want to step back and ask yourself, are my personal views seeping into my coverage? But I don't believe you do that by trying to include on an equal basis the voices of people who simply don't have the information relevant to the issue you're covering.
That's right. We ran into a little bit of that in the emails story. After the initial 3 stories, there was some people in the journalism school who were trying to discredit it because we didn't go through and talk to every single one of them who had nothing to do with it, right? Or at least we had no evidence that they did. Something like that. It's like it's not a checking off, just we're going to talk to this person and then balance it with that person thing. It's talking to the people, I think, who are really relevant to the story. But then the bigger picture, I was thinking while Ashton was talking, is you have to constantly ground yourself. I mean, we're both white. Our readership of the Jackson Free Press has long been majority Black. We're in a majority Black city. But it's not just because we're here in a majority Black city, it's because of the kinds of coverage we do and that we deeply listen. We're often the only white people in the room. My partner in this, Kimberly Griffin, is, we have these conversations about the coverage, not for her to tell us what to do, but for her to listen to what we're doing and give other perspectives. Our boards are so, that we're, majority women and majority Black women or women of color, and they give us feedback on things. We ask for feedback. Now, it doesn't mean every single person is going to agree with what you do. If one person criticizes it, but you have this whole network of people who say you're doing the exact right thing, who are people of color, who are whatever it is, the people who you are writing about, if it's a group or whatever, who are saying you're exactly on the right track, ask this, look at that. And that's all about building the right kind of network and to get to know people and to be in the rooms and to listen deeply.
And that kind of segues nicely into my next question. I was going to ask, the field of journalism is historically and currently lacks diversity. So I'm wondering, what can we do as white reporters to begin to change that?
I've kind of worked in this for a long time. I used to be the diversity chair of a national journalism organization that had no people of color on the board. Don't get me started. I mean, the difficulties then of trying to have these kinds of conversations. But, it's like with us, and when I say us, I mean like at the Jackson Free Press for 20 years. We've just been in the rooms. We've gotten to know people. We get out of our own comfort zones. We go and we listen and we ask questions. And we say, what's not being covered in the city or in your community? I've done that for 20 years. I mean, I'm in Jackson. I mean, if I walk into a room full that's all white people, I start getting jittery because I'm just not used to, or anywhere, frankly, but I'm not used to that. I live in a world, and I'm one of those people who don't love the phrase diversity anymore, but I'm not criticizing it. It's just, it's inadequate, right? because you can't just have fake diversity either. You have to, in journalism, I used to talk to people about the different legs of the stool. People were obsessed just with hiring, and it's like, well, you're going to hire people. Some people are going to leave, no matter what their race or background is. So it's about so much more than hiring. It's about, yes, hiring. Our startup team was half white and half black. It's like, well, this is the kind, we're very cognizant and deliberate, but alone, if we're not also studying systemic racism, if we're not being parts of race dialogues, and if we're not studying history, and understanding things so that we can draw a perspective, then that's on us as individuals. If we don't know, like New York City, where I've spent a lot of time, how many people don't know the race history of New York City? So many of the things, I go there and I seek out things just like I do here, but it's like, how many people haven't visited parts of the city, or don't know what Weeksville was, or whatever the case might be, Seneca Village in Central Park. So that's the thing, you've got to dig in, and then you have to, you just have to be fully interested. I don't even know how else to say it, and full compassion. It's like, it's just, we have to expand what we learn. We have to expand our circles. We have to learn to listen to people who aren't like us. We need to be curious about their history. And to me, it's like, if journalists would just get out of their bubble. I mean, white bubbles are boring, but then it's just like, just get out of them, be curious.
Yeah, well, I think one thing, that we can do is to intentionally make sure we're making space for other voices, other journalists. One thing Donna's tweeted that I kind of internalized, and she's talked about this and tweeted about it, is that she's tired of seeing panels at universities of nothing but white men, or all white panels. So a few weeks ago, a former political science professor of mine asked if I would be on a panel with some others, including the Secretary of State, to talk about voting rights issues in Mississippi. And so the first thing I thought of was, what Donna has said about these all white panels. And I kind of text her about it and told her about it. And I was like, I feel like maybe I should ask him, am I going to be one of just another, 5 white guys on the panel? How diverse is it? And she was like, yeah, please, do that. So I did. Turns out I'm apparently, aside from the Secretary of State, the only white guy they've invited. But, I'm really glad she pointed that out, because that's something I might not have thought about. And I'm trying to be more conscious in other situations too, not just, panels at universities, but other situations too, because I am a gay man. So, that's my quote unquote diversity that I can bring. And I really don't like that term either. I don't know exactly why I don't like it, but I also kind of just have gotten tired of hearing the term. And maybe it's because I hear so many PR people use it, but I still have to remember that I'm also a white man, and I can go throughout my day without people knowing that I'm gay, but I'm a white man, so I get privileges that other people don't. And people in some cases are going to, just because I'm white and male, take me more seriously automatically than they would if I were a woman, or if I were a reporter of color. And so I think just being conscious about that, and being aware of where you fit in, and of how other people are being treated, and whether they get a seat at the table, I think that's really important.
Conscientiousness, certainly. All right, let's end on this that we ask everyone to close the show with. What journalism organization that you're not affiliated with would you like to salute?
Well, yeah, I mean, Dame popped to mind immediately, because it's, you've got the 19th out there now, which is a women's focused nonprofit, and they do some good stuff,
Yep.
But they've got a lot of money, and Dame is a woman's publication, nonprofit online that's been out there for a while, and they don't have a lot of money. And so it's like us, we're scrappy, and so far rely mostly on reader contributions, which is actually have lots of them. But and then Dame publishes some really good stuff, and they're edgy, and they like they published a piece that I wrote about Ronan Farrow's book and some of the things that kind of came out of that I don't know that a lot of other publications are willing to do. So yeah, I would definitely look up Dame magazine. A lot of really smart women writing there, very diverse, very quote unquote, right, very digging in deep, kind of like we try to do.
All right, Donna, Ashton, thank you for taking the time to join us. Best of luck with the Mississippi Free Press.
Thank you, and thanks so much for having us.
March is Women's History Month, and the Journalism Salute would like to pay tribute to Raquel Rutledge, who earned a Pulitzer Prize in 2010 for her investigative watchdog reporting at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Through her series Cashing In on Kids, Rutledge exposed the Wisconsin Shares child care program's history of handing out licenses to people with serious convictions, and identified at least 16 child care centers that were closely linked to drug operations. The investigation, which started with an anonymous tip from a reader, led to a child care fraud crackdown that saved $45 million in taxpayer dollars in 2010 alone. Rutledge shared that the reaction from authorities has been, quote, interesting, as they only seem to take action when we are ready to publish a story. I'm Emmy Liederman.
Welcome to Journalism History, a podcast that rips out the pages of your history books to re-examine the stories you thought you knew and the ones you were never told.
I'm Terry Finneman, and I research media coverage of women in politics.
And I'm Nick Hirschon, and I research the history of New York sports.
And I'm Ken Ward, and I research the journalism history of the Great Plains and Rocky Mountains. Find the Journalism History Podcast at journalism-history.org/podcast and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
All right, so let's go inside the reporter's notebook. Emmy Liederman is taking comprehensive notes over the course of the interview. You heard her ask some questions as well. Emmy, what was your biggest takeaway from this conversation with them?
Something that really struck me was what Ashton mentioned about after he graduated from college, he had a few opportunities to maybe do some reporting locally in Mississippi, but he knew that it wouldn't be the type of journalism that he was really energized to do, covering systemic racism, covering the type of topics that really needed attention that typically journalists in Mississippi would shy away from. So I thought it was really interesting that after college, we're all so set on kind of getting our first job and getting this professional experience right away. But he took a step back, did some blogging, and decided that he would wait until a better opportunity came about. So what they talk about in terms of access journalism is interesting as well, because sometimes not all of the resources are going to be handed to you, and you kind of have to scout it out and scout out, what types of sources that you need. And, it's not going to always be easy to tell certain stories. And both Ashton and Donna talked about how you have to give up some access because you are doing the good reporting and you're understanding that people might not want to talk to you, but you have to find different ways, different angles to hit in terms of getting that information. And it might not always be easy, but there are so many different routes you can take. And if you don't have access, the question should be, how can you get access?
As an aspiring reporter yourself, what traits did the two of them have that you kind of looked up to?
They're just total go-getters. They don't really take no for an answer, but at the same time, they hold the ethics of journalism very highly in all of their reporting. They're interested in stepping away from, their bias as white journalists and shining a light on topics that they find important and using their own privilege to do so. And that's something that's really inspiring and energizing for me, is to see people who don't want to take the easy way out and are more intrigued to tell a story when other people are telling them no.
And the fact that they were able to start the Mississippi Free Press in the middle of a pandemic, certainly very impressive, right?
Right, and the fact that they didn't even have full website, their website wasn't completed when they decided that they wanted to publish it, but they were very nimble and just said, we're going to use this temporary website and it's not going to be perfect, but it's what Mississippi needs right now, which is another interesting part of what they did.
We close Emmy Liederman's Reporter's Notebook, and we will bring it back in future episodes. Thank you, Emmy.
Thank you.
The Journalism Salute is dedicated to the memory of Dr. Robert Cole, who ran the journalism department at Trenton State College, the College of New Jersey, for more than 30 years.
To have everyone come back to celebrate his contributions to all of our careers was just, such a wonderful testament to his impact.
With so many students earning their diplomas, graduations can sometimes feel pretty impersonal. But at the College of New Jersey's Journalism Department graduation, Christina Fiore remembers that Cole recognized the individual interests of every person who walked across that stage. Fiore, who is now the Director of Enterprise and Investigative Reporting at MedPage Today, received a shout-out from Cole for her interest in science writing, which has stuck with her ever since.
I think that was the great thing about Bob Cole, is that he was so focused on each individual student and, knew every single one of the students, and he cared about their careers and their path.
I'm Emmy Liederman, College of New Jersey, class of 2021.
Thank you for listening to the Journalism Salute. Please let us know what you think of the show. You can find us on Twitter @JournalismPod, and you can email us at journalismsalute@gmail.com.